Hey folks, welcome to Advisory. Happy Thursday.
Wait a minute. It's Wednesday, Mr. Hall. It is not Thursday.
No, I regret to inform you that today is in fact Thursday as far as I'm concerned because tomorrow is the last day of the week. Don't forget that we have a 4-day weekend this weekend. We're out on Friday and on Monday. So you can't tell me that today is not a very Thursday feeling Wednesday because tomorrow is going to be a very Friday feeling Thursday. Today, I wanted to wrap up our series on Women's History Month. And sometimes people ask this question.
Why do we have a Women's History Month and not a Men's History Month?
What happened to all the men?
How come the fellas don't get a month, okay? Why can't the fellas get a month? And it's kind of the same thing as during Black History Month or Hispanic Heritage Month, asking, well, why don't we have a White History Month?
Now, where is the White History Month, pray tell?
The common denominator, the thing that ties all these things together and the reason that we recognize all these months, if there is a month celebrating it that is recognized especially by the government or by just our culture, it's usually because that group of people was disenfranchised or oppressed at one point in our history, or in some ways might still be dealing with some form of oppression. And so we as a collective decide to use one of these months to focus in on them and tell their stories. And it all comes down to who has and has not had rights at any given time in our country's history. And in this case, the fight for women's rights has not only been a national conversation, but a global one. And it's one that is still going on today. I'm now going to show you this video from the United Nations YouTube channel. It's a very brief overview of the history of women's rights around the world. It's a short video. Be warned, the music is a little loud, but it gives some very important milestones in the fight for women's rights across the last few centuries.
Women and girls are leaders, change makers, caretakers, and peacekeepers. But while they have an empowered role in our societies, to this day, women and girls are still forced to fight for their rights. How much progress have we achieved? And how much work remains? How can you carry on the fight for equal rights? Women's struggle for equal rights is centuries old. But 1848 marked a watershed moment for women's rights with the Seneca Falls Convention, where women activists publicly petitioned for their civil, social, political, and religious rights. In 1893, New Zealand sent a message to other activists across the world that equal voting rights were achievable through advocacy. Entering the 20th century, women around the world are mobilizing in ever greater numbers to campaign for gender equality. Just as women's role in the labor force is rapidly evolving by opening up options beyond caretaking roles. In 1945, the United Nations is formed in response to the destructive toll of 2 world wars, and Eleanor Roosevelt oversees the drafting of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. For all the world to hear, she and other advocates underline the place of women's rights within. This sets a foundation for women's rights norms and standards at the international level. In the subsequent decades, just as women are taking historic leadership positions in government, women activists at the grassroots level dovetail with the worldwide momentum by becoming powerful symbols of feminist resistance and social change. This momentum reaches a climax in 1995 when the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action presents a visionary global agenda for women and girls' rights. But in spite of all the progress, as we enter the 21st century, patriarchal stigmas persist and exemplary leaders arise to resist them. With the rise of the digital age, social media emerges as a crucial tool to galvanize populations in the fight against injustice. A single woman's voice is now louder than ever. Grassroots activists trigger social movements online and offline, from cities to villages, inspiring future generations of women and girl leaders. After relentless campaigning, these movements generate changes in policy that signal a true shift in international attitudes and practice towards equal rights. Where are we now? A quarter century after the Beijing Declaration, women and men must mobilize together to overcome the remaining obstacles to gender equality. They must fight for an end to gender-based violence, for access to healthcare, for equal pay, and for equal participation in political life. The ink isn't dry. Be a part of Generation Equality and let us continue to write history together.
So hopefully you recognize some of those events or maybe learned about a couple of different ones, especially from other countries. And as was mentioned at the end of the video, the struggle for women's rights and women's equality across the world is very much an ongoing fight. I want to highlight for you one story of this person, Malala Yousafzai. You may have heard the name Malala in recent history, but you may not know who she is, why she's famous, and what she stands for. Malala was a young Pakistani girl trying to get an education when her area was taken over by the extremist group, the Taliban, who said that girls could not get an education. This interview from 2014 tells her story.
A day out in Birmingham for Malala Yousafzai. This 16-year-old's life was transformed by the attack that nearly killed her.
Hello.
1 year on, I've been spending time with her and her family.
Hello, Malala. How are you? So what has been the hardest thing about coming to Birmingham?
Nothing.
The weather, of course.
Yeah, the weather, yeah.
I too. The weather and seeing Malala. She had like the whole face was like big. And here it was like, that's good.
She's much better now than she was. But your life changed in that one moment. You know, actually, in seconds, everyone's life changed in that moment.
Malala was only 11 when she first spoke out for girls' rights to go to school.
I will get my education if it is in home, school or any place.
What, really?
The world she knew was about to disappear. Her home valley of Swat in northern Pakistan came under the brutal rule of the Taliban.
I was afraid of my future. I don't want to see any girl to be ignorant, and I don't want to see any girl to be illiterate in future. And I do not want my future to be just sitting in a room and to be imprisoned in four walls and just cooking and giving birth to children. And I didn't want to see my life in that way.
The Taliban's control of the area was short-lived, but still Malala's determination would come at a cost. On the 9th of October last year, she and her friends were travelling home on their school bus when it was stopped.
जब हम वहाँ आए तो दो लड़के आए, मैंने तो सिर्फ एक ही देखा था।
पीछे आया तो उन्होंने हमसे पूछा कि मलाला यूसुफजई कौन है?
तो फिर उसने डायरेक्ट फायरिंग की और
Malala was shot in the head, deliberately targeted by the extremists. Today, Malala's become the face of the world's 57 million out-of-school children. She has an influence few other 16-year-olds can imagine, and yet she told me she still sees herself as an ordinary teenager. Do you believe in a dialogue with the Taliban, whether in your own country or in Afghanistan? Is that the way forward, do you think?
I don't want to go deep in those issues of terrorism because it's a job of the government to do it. It's a job of the Afghanistan government as well to do this. And I also request the Taliban that they must stop it and they must do what they want through dialogue. They must tell us what they want. And killing people and slaughtering people and flogging people and blasting school is totally against Islam. They are misusing the name of Islam. Islam tells us to be peaceful. Islam tells us about brotherhood. This is not the true Islam which the terrorists are showing us.
So at only 11 years old, Malala started advocating for the free and equal education of young girls. And when the Taliban took over, they didn't like that. They didn't want girls to be anything other than housewives. They believed that women are second-class citizens. And they realized that if you educate girls, they will realize that they have the potential to be more than just that, than just somebody who stays at home and supports a family. She spoke out so much that they targeted her directly, tried to silence her, but because she knew what she was standing up for, because she had resilience, because she felt solid in her convictions, she came back all the stronger. She refused to be silenced even by a bullet. Now we fast forward to 2021, just 3 years ago. By the time of this recording, Malala had already graduated college, fulfilling her dream to get a good education. and still has to fight for the rights of girls and young children around the world, especially in Afghanistan, to get an education.
For Malala Yousafzai, the fall of Afghanistan to the Taliban once again was heartbreakingly familiar and painful. All the more so because at the very moment it was happening, she herself was still recovering from the Taliban attack that changed her life at the age of 15. Malala, when Afghanistan fell so quickly to the Taliban, I could not stop thinking about you, wondering how you felt watching those images, wondering where you were. And then I've come to learn you were actually in the hospital with your 6th surgery, still recovering 9 years later from a single Taliban bullet. How did that strike you in those moments?
Savannah, I just could not process what was happening in Afghanistan, because in that very same week, I was going through a surgery that was part of that long time recovery from that one bullet. And for me, it was just a reminder that if for one individual it takes that many surgeries and that many years to actually fix the scars from just one bullet, we cannot imagine the millions of bullets that the people of Afghanistan and people in parts of Pakistan have taken in the past 2 to 4 decades.
Malala's nonprofit, the Malala Fund, has invested close to $2 million in Afghanistan for the education of girls. When the U.S. withdrew and Taliban took over, they were quick to move what activists and teachers they could to safety, fearing the Taliban were a threat to their lives and their livelihoods. The Taliban is saying, we've changed. We're not that Taliban that committed all those atrocities and didn't let girls go to secondary schools. Do you believe the Taliban when it says things like that?
The Taliban are known for this political ideology that they do not accept women as equal to men. They announced that boys can go to school, but they did not mention girls. And they're doing these political gatherings and meetings, and we do not see, a single woman there. Women have just suddenly disappeared from that public, social, political life.
We have seen a few brave women go out and protest, and then we've seen the Taliban come in and shut those protests down. What do you think when you see images like that?
So the Taliban's narrative that, this is so-called Islamic thing that women cannot be equal, women are challenging that. So this is something that gives me hope, and that is why we need to listen to the voices of Afghan women and girls.
Are you disappointed with the way the Biden administration and the U.S. handled this withdrawal from Afghanistan?
I wish that the Biden administration and other world leaders had done more to protect human rights, women's and girls' rights, but it's never too late. So whether it is a political deal, negotiations, recognizing the Taliban government, they must be conditional on the fact that the Taliban recognize women's and girls' right to education.
Malala's own education, a priority she almost died for. After she was shot by the Taliban, she was flown to the UK for medical treatment and has lived there ever since, last year completing her own schooling with honors from one of the top universities in the world, Oxford. I remember you said, I just want to be a regular college girl. How did it go? You've graduated now. How was that experience?
As a girl in my early 20s, trying to get her education, but also make friends and socialize. I enjoyed my time in those beautiful colleges and libraries of Oxford, and I made some great, amazing friends there.
Malala clearly enjoyed being just another student, but to countless girls worldwide, the Nobel Prize winner and activist is a role model fighting for their future. This is the Day of the Girl. There are a lot of young girls who look up to you. What's your message to girls who want to make a difference in their own communities?
Believe in yourself, believe in your voice, believe in the dedication and determination that you hold for the things that you believe in. You can make it happen.
Believe in yourself and believe in your voice. And that's coming from somebody who was almost literally killed for using their voice. On the next slides, you'll see some discussion questions. The first two talk generally about women's rights, why it's been so difficult for women to get basic rights over the years, and why it's so important that women participate equitably alongside men in important fields in our society. And the last two talk specifically about Malala, what makes her story so impactful and so important to people around the world. And I want you to think about number 4, just in general. Why is getting a quality education so important? Oftentimes, because we live in America and we have free public education, we can take for granted that not everybody around the world has that exact right. And so I want you to spend some time thinking about what would happen if that right to education was taken away from you. Why is it so important to get some kind of quality education in your life? And then the last question down here is more of an activity. I want you to go to ourworldindata.org/women-rights and explore some of the things that they have there. And I'll show you what that is. You can explore lots of parts of this website, but specific to women's rights, they have a lot of good research and writing, as well as some really interesting charts here that you can scroll around on and interact with. And it has all sorts of topics in regards to women's rights. This shows how many women participate in parliament in certain countries. This is an overall distribution of political empowerment. It then also goes through specific rights and what countries do and do not offer that to women. It's got a ton of good information, maybe some eye-opening things. I want you to look through some of those things and talk about what you learn. But that is all from me. I hope you enjoy those discussions and that activity. Be good to yourself and others, and I'll see you real soon.